Welcome to Maximum Attack Rallying and to another dose of rallying chit chat. This week we have been doing some rallying, albeit of the virtual kind. Yes, EA Sports WRC have released their Le Maestro's content expansion pack. Last week I did a video just giving you an overview, but now we've had a chance to have a go, so it's time to ask the very important question. Is it worth the money and should you download it? If you haven't watched that video, go and check it out. I give a detailed overview of what's included, but as a very quick reminder, the pack includes 6 new cars, 12 new stages, 16 moments, 17 liveries, all celebrating French dominance of the WRC over the last 2 decades or so. Is it worth the money? Let's get into that, shall we? So in terms of content, there is a lot in there. The 12 stages are split over Monte Carlo and Portugal. The most significant addition there, I think, is probably the FAF stage, which was a surprising omission from the game. So it's nice to see that in there. Obviously with Monte Carlo just kicking off the 2025 season, if you're looking to relive Sébastien Ogier's 10th victory, maybe that's more important to you. I haven't spent too much time on the stages because I want to focus this video on the cars. Traction GG did a good overview of the historical significance of each car over on their channel, so do go and check that out. They did a pretty good job of that. So if you're wondering what each of these cars means, that is worth a watch. I don't want to focus too much on that because I want to talk about driving. I'm going to start with the Citroen Xsara. For me, that is the most important car in the game, and it's nice to see that that's kind of the poster car for this DLC, because I think it's a significant car. Obviously, I'm something of an F2 nerd anyway, but it's nice to see that that addition, and it's something that EA said that they'd had a lot of demand for. How does it feel? How does it feel? I think having driven it only on tarmac, because why would you drive the Xsara on gravel? That would be weird, because I mean, everyone remembers that car because it was so fast on tarmac, and it won the Tour de Corse and Rally Catalunya outright in 1999. It was its moment in history. It was the last two-wheel drive car to win a WRC round outright. Sorry, I'm getting sidetracked by a history lesson. How does it feel? It feels fine. It feels fine. You know, I think in the time I've driven it, it feels kind of similar to the Megane and to the 306. Those, for me, are probably the best two F2 cars in the game. I don't really get on with the Golf or the Ibiza. I like the Escort, because obviously I'm an Escort fanboy, but yeah, so I think in handling terms, it feels on a level with those. I think the only thing I would say, so I back-to-backed it with the Megane, and it felt a little bit less frantic than the Megane, but I think that might be the gearing. So the Megane has a 7-speed gearbox and the Xsara only has 6. So I think you feel a little bit busier in the Megane compared to the Xsara, but times-wise, I was pretty much on point with the Megane. So yeah, so I think it's a really good addition to the game. I enjoyed it, and I'm looking forward to experimenting with it more. Sticking with the front-wheel drive theme, we have the 206 Super 1600. In Super 1600, I probably spend most of my time driving the Puma, and they are quite different, I found. The 206 feels more lively than the Puma. It's a bit more tail happy. It's not in a bad way, it's just, it feels like the turning's a bit sharper, and it sort of rotates more, it feels like to me. So that is a difference, definitely between those two. I think the biggest difference that I noticed, however, was the gearing. It feels like in the 206, you are constantly on the rev limiter. Again, I back-to-backed it with the Puma just as a kind of sanity check, and it just felt to me like in the 206, you are constantly changing gears. Whether that is a reflection of the real car, I don't know, having not driven the real deal, but it is nice that there is those differences in personality between each car, so I'm pleased to see that. So that was good. I want to move on, however. I made the slight mistake of jumping from those two into the Citroen C3 WRC, so that was quite an experience, so we should probably talk about that one next. And I think it's safe to say that it felt rather frantic after the 206. It was kind of a shock to the system, obviously much faster, and a huge jump in performance. That said, I really like the 17 era cars in EA WRC. I actually think they're more fun to drive than the Rally 1 cars. I like the way that they've kind of given that sense of aero and other cars really being tied down. If you compare it to like the DS3 WRC, for example, which I drove after the C3, it feels like it rolls a lot less, the C3, and it just feels a lot more tied down somehow. So I think they've integrated that relatively well. In terms of the C3, perhaps a little bit trickier to drive than the Fiesta of the same era, but you might expect that, mightn't you? Because obviously the C3 was a notoriously tricky car. That was Citroen's last full WRC effort, and ultimately, despite taking a couple of victories, it was not a successful one, but it is a nice addition to the game. I'm really glad to see that one in there. There was a spin, I had a little spin in that one before the tunnel in one of the stages of Central European Rally, which is where I did most of the driving for this review, just to kind of use stages that I was familiar with. And there's a corner going under a bridge, sort of through a tunnel, and I think I spun in pretty much every car. It just kept catching me out. I don't know what was happening there. I've never usually had an issue with that corner, but for some reason it kept catching me out. Anyway, so I moved on from that into the 2011 to 2016 era cars with the DS3 WRC. Like I said, that car rolled. It felt like it rolled a lot more after the C3, but somehow also felt easier to drive, a little bit less frantic. Again, I quite like the cars from that era. I think that is an underrated set of regulations. So on that basis, it's nice to see the DS3 in the game. Obviously a very significant car in French terms. It was a car that Lowe won his final championship in, so nice to see that in there. So yeah, a good addition. I think another thing I noticed though was the contrast between the DS3 and then the Polo WRC. Obviously those cars from the same era. The Polo was the car that kind of dominated that regulation set for 4 seasons. I think again it's a bit like the 206. To me the Polo felt like it had super short gearing compared to the DS3 somehow. It felt, in acceleration terms, it felt a lot more frantic, which was, it was kind of surprising. That said though, I think it felt easier to drive somehow. It just felt more natural, and it felt like I kind of got into the groove with the Polo much more quickly than I did with the DS3. So that again was an interesting comparison, and I think it'd be even more interesting for, you know, to get the feeling of someone who had driven both cars in real life. There are not many people that have done that, I recognise, but you know, I think to have some feedback and see if that difference translates from the digital world to the real world, if EA Sports have captured that, or if that's just kind of a result of how they designed the cars in the game. So that was interesting. The only other thing I would say about the Polo is that it reminded me how terrible I am at driving on gravel. I had a little go in it on the FAF stage, and I was not very good. FAF was an enjoyable stage for the most part, tricky, very tricky. I'm not very good on gravel at all. And I did crash a lot because I don't tend to drive too much on gravel. I'm more of a tarmac guy, as I said, but very interesting to try, and obviously nice to do that iconic jump, even if it wasn't in real life. Just a quick mention on the final car, and that is the Citroen C2 R2. I was pleasantly surprised by it. Little car, obviously it felt slow. It was the one that I messed around with last, so obviously it felt slow after all the WRC cars, but I think it's surprisingly good. I've heard that in real life those cars are a little bit twitchy. Doesn't seem to be like that in the game, but obviously, again, I don't know how that compares to real life, but I expected it to feel slow compared to the turbocharged cars, because obviously it's a much older car than, you know, Fiesta Rally 4, for example, but it worked surprisingly well. And again, I enjoy driving those sort of underpowered cars. I know a lot of people gravitate towards the WRC cars, but for me, I actually spend more time driving the lower category cars, because I think they're kind of more enjoyable in a way. One of my favourite cars to drive in the game is the old Group A Mark II Golf, because I think there's just something fun about driving that car. H-pattern gearbox, a bit less pace, and you kind of just have to wring its neck, and you're not kind of, it's not sensory overload in the same way that it is with a more modern WRC car. So that is a quick overview of the cars. Let's answer that big question though, is it worth it? And I have to say it is an overwhelming yes from me. When you consider the price, so it's £8.99 or $9.99 if you're buying it in dollars or euros, I believe. I think that represents pretty good value, to be honest. You know, you're getting 6 cars, 12 stages, liveries and things, which doesn't bother me personally, but obviously if you want that visual experience, obviously having a greater choice of liveries is a good thing, isn't it? So I think that's a pretty good value, isn't it? You know, there's a lot of development work gone into creating those stages and those cars. So I think in value terms, it's good, it's enjoyable. For me, it's actually better value than the 2024 season expansion, which didn't impress me hugely, to be honest. Obviously, we got the 2024 liveries, but that to me didn't feel like a big step change in the game. You know, those liveries and those changes to the cars to bring them to 2024 spec didn't represent a big enough change for me. So I think this Le Maestro expansion pack is a much better value proposition. There are a couple of things that I should mention, however. So right now the stages are only available in time trial and quick play mode. I believe you can't use them in career mode. That might bother you depending on how you use the game. Personally, I only tend to use time trial and quick play mode. I haven't really used career mode too much. I'm not into the kind of narrative element. I just want to kind of drive the car. So that hasn't bothered me too much. There is a slightly weird omission in the fact that Sebastian Loeb isn't mentioned too much, although a lot of those cars are obviously very significant to him. Does that bother me? Not really. I guess it's some kind of licensing related issue, but it's not a biggie. It's a bit weird, but you still got all the cars, you still got the stages, so kind of doesn't matter really, does it? But otherwise, yeah, I think I have to say I am overall impressed by it. I think it is a very good addition to the game. Like I said, much better than the 2024 expansion in my perspective. So I am pleased to see that. I think they've done a really good job with it. I am also excited to see what we will get with the next expansion, which is the Hard Chargers upgrade pack, which comes in the spring. No word yet on what that's going to include, but it should include some more cars, so I'm very interested to see what that contains. And that leaves us with a question, doesn't it? What should it contain? What do you think it should contain? What cars would you like to see in there? There are some very big omissions in my view that we still need to see added. The big one for me is the Clio Rally 3, because obviously that's a current car, and I do think it would be great to see that added. I would also very much like to see a couple of sets completed. So in the 2011 to 2016 cars, we do not have the Fiesta, so it would be nice to see that in there. And in the 2017 to 21 cars, we don't have the Yaris WRC, so I'd very much like to see that included as well. Do let me know in the comments what cars you would like to see in there, what stages, what do you think is missing that they need to add, and how you've been getting on with the Le Maestro pack as well. As always, follow me over on socials, and do please like and subscribe to me here on YouTube. I will see you again next time.